Greetings from the other side. Welcome to Paranormal M, where we dive deep into the mysteries of the unknown. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest eerie discoveries. We hope you're ready to explore the supernatural with us. Experience with trapped bird, foreshadowing / omen of near death and premonitory feeling. This is a story very near to my heart. I'm wondering if my experience with this bird was something maybe others have had, or if this was just a specific thing to this event. Warning: domestic violence related. When I was young, I was having lunch with my grandmother, and while we sat on the porch, a bird comes darting in, makes a big circle above our heads. It looked absolutely terrified. It then started flying into this corner over and over again, confused. This really caught my attention as it was very unusual. I asked my grandmother to come look. She immediately puts her hand on her heart and says, "This is not good." She tells my grandpa, who gets a long pole and a t-shirt. He's able to cover the bird and set it free. My grandmother said something like, "Poor thing, must have been horrible. Makes my heart sink." My grandmother really looked distressed. Later on, she admitted having an overwhelming feeling of being in a life and death situation. The very next day, my father enters her home without permission and tortures and tries to murder my mother. Again, the same people, me, my grandfather, and grandmother, who saved that bird the day before, saved my mother, who was being brutally beaten and locked into a room. First, I hear someone who calls my grandparents. My grandmother and grandfather come to the house by truck. My grandfather stops my father at gunpoint, and my granny holds my mother, who's then saved. I cannot stress this enough, but I know as a fact, deep, deep in my heart, that the bird that flew in that day was a message about what was to come. That was one of the scariest things I've had to experience, and also the reason why I think there's more to the world than our eyes can see. I thought I was going to lose my mind, but I was being haunted. This happened when I was about 18. I was still living with my mother and brother. I had enough trouble in my life that it would actually justify being mentally unwell. But this was beyond that, and weird timing because things were fine. I was doing relatively good, but a few months' time I had become increasingly suicidal and lost, just absolutely confused. I'd have spells of walking into rooms and not knowing how I got there. This was beyond the normal forgetfulness. In the middle of this, I had to be hospitalized for a sudden infection. This was followed by an accident, and it was the first and last time in my life that I ever fainted. I started having weird nightmares that I don't want to describe here for brevity. I prayed this confusion would go away. I did some cleansing rituals, and the confirmation came not from me, but what my family saw. They didn't know about me being distressed yet. Keep that in mind. First event. My brothers and my room were door to door, 1.5 meters apart. We were at a dead-end T-junction. To the right side of my room was a bathroom. I was in the bathroom. My brother enters my room and starts chatting, long enough that me in the bathroom doing my hair asked him in a curious way, "Who are you talking to?" He yells and I exit the bathroom. All doors to these 3 rooms were wide open. I enter my room to find my brother inside my room looking white as ash in the face. He said he saw a girl sitting on my bed facing the wall. long black hair like mine and looked like me, but in a dress. And for quite a while thought that she was me and was attempting to talk to her, but with no reply. My brother's really afraid of these things, and he would not touch anything supernatural. Me and my brother talked about it, and I say, "Don't tell Mom. Just don't. I want to deal with this." We both go to bed. Next day, I'm frantically thinking how to get rid of this spirit because now I know I'm kind of screwed. Second event. After dinner, we're all sitting at the table. We'd all just come home and my dog is happily sitting by us, just waiting for some yummy food from the table as usual. That's when he gets up, faces away from us, and starts wildly barking and growling at the front door. This makes my mother look to the door, and with the door to my back, she then gets up and says something like, "Who are you? Get out!" By now, we're all standing. The dog has an aggressive posture, growling, and has all the hairs in his back standing. Our front door had metal bars in front, and a huge sliding iron gate. We never heard that opening. We're all like, "Who was that? How did they get here?" My mom just goes, "Calm down. Never mind, it's not real." She does the sign of a cross and says a little prayer. We then told my mom about event number 1, and she said, "Well, then that's that." We were so scared we didn't want to talk about it anymore and just told us to ignore it. Later, when I asked my mom says that she saw a woman with long curly black hair and a simple cotton dress. She thought it was a beggar or a crazy person that had somehow entered the house. She had her hands grabbing the bars and face pressed between, imagine it like a prisoner. She looked at the dog, looked at my mom, turned quote-unquote foggy, disappeared. Front door was very well lit. The next day was a Saturday. We were free and my mom was like a drill sergeant. We must have spent like half a kilo of rock salt and loads of incense, sage, and herbal and salt bath for all the family. We went full exorcism on the house. The dreams faded away in about a week. I started recovering. I was having an appetite again. My mind was also clearing up. The forgetfulness was gone. I was doing good again, like I was never even unwell in the first place. But I was quite disturbed and a bit scared. I wonder if I picked up this companion at the hospital. Lady in Red. Kind of. I've done my fair research since I've been an adult, and I've never forgotten this chain of experiences. I moved in with my father when I turned 9. He was a single dad and worked long hours, and it was just him and myself living in a 4-bedroom house in East Los Angeles. I was pretty grown up for being so young, walked myself to and from school, did my own laundry, could even make myself basic meals and stuff. So it was completely normal for me to get home from school, make a snack, and get cozied up with my PlayStation and play something for a bit before my dad came home from work. Skip forward to living there for about 2 months. I started feeling weird, like I wasn't alone in the house. I kept telling my dad how I felt. I tried saying that it was normal. It was a big move for someone my age, and I was just starting a new school. So I just started waking up and having panic attacks about dying. I seriously was having an existential crisis at 9 years old. One day, playing some PS1, probably drinking some Tang, I saw this shadow walk down the hallway. I knew I was home alone. I got so fucking scared. I told my dad and he brushed it off. Same thing happened a few days after that, Except I was now positioning myself so that I was fully facing the door while being in my room. Nothing was going to get past me. It happened pretty fast, but I knew for sure that it was a woman. She had long black hair and was wearing like a weird older silk red dress. I asked to go to my dad's friend's house after school the very next day and continued. I made sure I was never home alone. This whole time, my anxiety about dying kind of turned into an obsession. I started to not be able to sleep. I was scared to take showers with the door closed. I started sleeping with the lights on, and I never needed a nightlight before. This is where it starts to get even creepier. A few months go by. My anxiety starts to go away a little bit. I'm now down to just a nightlight on in the corner. Hallway light can still be turned off. She started appearing again, but she was going into my room. I would feel a slight pressure like someone sitting on the end of my bed, and then it would feel like someone was gently running their fingers through my hair. The first few times I remember being paralyzed. I know it wasn't sleep paralysis because I was positive I'd never fallen asleep. But when I would feel the pressure after that, I would curl into a ball under my blankets until I felt the presence to be gone. Never seen her again, but I swear I never feel alone. And it's been 20 years. Portal to Paradise. It happened, I'd say, late summer, when the weather was becoming colder. I often went with my father whenever he was doing work on boats and ships. My father was a fisherman and was repairing a friend's large wooden fishing trawler, which was in sort of an alcove. He was doing a job which involved a technique called caulking. And while he was doing this, I became bored and looked around for something to do. I looked off the port side of the boat. I saw a buoy. It was up against the shoreline, and I decided I wanted to play with it. When I got off the boat and made my way over to it, it was a little bit taller than me. It was round and very rusted. I started pushing it out into the water, and it would travel for a bit before beaching itself again. This happened 2 or 3 more times before it started traveling by itself. I found this unusual. I watched it as it traveled along, but then went into the embankment. I was very confused by what just happened. As where it went, it was just like solid rock. I went over to where it had entered the embankment, and I found a stone archway. It was made from 3 large slabs, of which seemed to be made of sandstone. When I peered in to see where the buoy went, it was floating across a tropical ocean toward a beach. The beach had palm trees and the ocean was sky blue. It would look like one of the islands from the Maldives. I was completely blown away, and in the back of my mind, I wanted to swim in the direction the buoy went toward the beach. I stood there for quite a while contemplating if I stepped through the door and swim toward the beach, but also concerned about what would happen if I did. I decided to call my father to come and see what I found. This was world-changing for me, but things were about to get stranger. I called to my father to come to me, but there was silence. I called again and heard him say, "I'll be there in a minute," paraphrasing. So I waited, and he never came. I was close to stepping through, but had a weird conscious thought that my father would be responsible for my disappearance. And of course, I didn't want that. So I decided against going in and heading back to the boat. When I got back to my father, he was still caulking the deck. The first thing I said was, "Why didn't you come when I called you?" He looked up at me, completely confused, and said something along the lines of, "I never heard you call me." Now I was even more confused. After this, I never said anything more. We packed up and left for home. As we were heading back up the hill next to the boat, I looked in the direction of where the doorway and portal was. Wondered what would have happened if I'd gone through. I bet you're thinking right now that this was something my child mind was making up, or maybe I was hallucinating, right? Wrong. When I was in my early 20s, I asked about that to my father. And he remembered. He remembered the buoy, he remembered the question I asked him. I didn't ask any further, as this confirmation carved it into stone for me. I also did a little investigating into the timeline, and everything lines up. My father passed away many years ago, and so I couldn't ask him any more questions. I often think back to that day and wished I had just gone through. With all the shitty thing in this world and the way my life is now, I think my life would have been better off if I had. I contemplated the situation throughout my life and the mammoth implication of such a feat. Changing space and time in order for a being or entity to get to me through the portal. I could only come to 3 conclusions: a god, aliens, or that this world is in fact a simulation. And I saw an intentional glitch in the Matrix, and that the operator spoke to me directly and had the ability to mimic my father's voice. This wasn't the only unusual situation to happen to me in my life, but I was definitely one of the most awesome memories I think I'll ever have and I'll treasure forever. The steps, the blow, and the watch. I'm fairly new to this, but after reading so many stories inspired me to share mine. Some might say it's fake, and that's fine, but it's incredibly real to me, and although I'm 19, this still happens. So here's the backstory. I grew up in Stockton, which was always moving around until I was about 7. That was when my mom bought our first house, and we got to settle down. This house wasn't old, maybe 15 at the time. The house was great at first. We had our own rooms, and nothing unusual. We were normal kids, and we played with the neighborhood kids. Our cousins would come over every so often. This was about 6 months after we had moved in. I was in bed, and at the time I had to share a room with my younger brother, who was 6 at the time. My grandpa was using what was his room temporarily. My mom had tucked my brother and I into bed. I was laying facing the wall, and about an hour had passed. I felt something blow on my neck. My brother was sort of a butt, as most kids are, and would mess with me. I assumed it was him, so I told him to go back to sleep. He didn't answer, so I turned to look at him, and he's in bed and I call his name. No answer, so I get up and look at him and he's passed out. I mean, like completely asleep. This kid is a heavy sleeper. So I'm thinking as a now 8-year-old, maybe like a draft, not thinking too much of it. I was finally able to fall asleep, but I was woken up to our old school box TV on static and at full volume. Mind you, this was on a TV stand to the very left top corner of the room. It was a stand that was held up by a wall. It was much too high for me or my brother to turn on, even if we were on our beds or our toy boxes. We had lost the remote about a month before this happened. I had to wake up my mom and she turned it off and everything was fine, but for a few months at least. Every so often I would feel like someone was breathing on my neck, but I would never think about it because I never saw anyone or heard anything. So fast forward and I was 9. My cousins came over for the weekend, and kids being kids, we played hide-and-seek tag. There were a total of 5 of us playing, me, my brother, and my 3 cousins. It was about midnight, and everyone was playing and the adults were downstairs. I was in my room hiding in the closet when my older cousin runs in and finds me and tags me. That means I have to start to run after her until I stopped dead in my tracks. At it felt as if I ran into a wall. But I was at my door and it was open and there was nothing there. I'm looking straight in front of me into the bathroom that was directly in front of my room, and I see what looked like a little girl the same age as me, but they were wearing the stereotypical old-fashioned 1800s little girl dress, and she was the sickly pale blue color. All of the lights were off, but it felt as if she was being lit up. But lights. She stood there and ran down the hall, and I stood there for a second thinking that, what just happened? Walked down the hall, still stuck on what happened. My cousin then ran in and I asked her if she was in the bathroom. But she wasn't. No one was in the bathroom, or even in my room beside me. I eventually forget about it, but everything in the house never felt right again. The house never felt welcoming or like it was before. It felt angry. And I felt like someone or something was watching me anywhere I went in the house. I would feel like something was watching me everywhere. When I would leave the house for school, I never felt something watching me. Only when I was in the house. Fast forward about 5 months. I was walking home by myself because I begged my mom to let me start going home after school instead of going into after-school program. That was a program that my elementary school had. My brother stayed there. My older brother, who was 16 at the time, was still at his high school, and it was in a different part of town. We'd usually hang out with his friends, so I would be the only one home. My grandpa, I mentioned earlier, had moved out a month after the first incident of the blowing on my neck. And I was excited. I felt like a cool teenager while only being 10. Now I'm going to describe the house setup, because it's important for this next encounter. The house was on a court, and when at the front door, you'd walk into the living room, and directly in front of the front door were the stairs that curved up to the right, and the top of the stairs was a master bedroom. That was on the left. And I guess to the left of that, my brother's room, and to the right, down a little bit of a hall, was my room, the bathroom, and my older brother's room. When you look past the stairs, you have the living room, and walking back, you can see the dining room. And behind a wall on the left is the kitchen where the house phone is. That's important. Then to the right of the dining room was a half bathroom, a closet, and a garage door. The garage was directly under my room to the bathroom, and my older brother's room. The backyard was able to be seen from each window of the back of the house, and we had a dog. She was very quiet and never barked, even at the people who'd walked before on over 9-foot cement walls that divided the backyard and the semi-main street. I walked into the house, assuming that I'm alone. I do my normal routine, put my shoes away, hanging up my backpack, and heading to the kitchen to call my mom on the house phone. I was calling her to tell her that I was getting home safe. We usually had like a 5-minute conversation, not too long, and I asked my mom if I have a soda that I was kept... What did they write here? I was going to have a not too long conversation, and I asked my mom if I can have a can of soda that was kept in the outside fridge in the garage. She says yes, and we say bye. Then I hang up. I walk into the garage, and as I'm grabbing the soda, I hear the floor upstairs creak like someone stood up. I didn't think anything of it until after that initial creak. It sounded as if someone was walking from the bathroom to my room, and then to my brother's room, like someone's checking or looking for something. So I open the garage door and I stand in the doorway. The creaking stopped. I thought it was my older brother home early, so I call his name and nothing. Then I call his name again and still nothing, but I ask if he wants me to grab him a soda too. Then I heard the creaking again, but this time it sounded as if they were running with heavy stomps down the hall and down the stairs. Out of reaction, I run back into the garage and hide behind the side of the fridge that you can't see if you open the garage door. I'm scared now, because those steps don't sound like my brother's. I hear the steps run down the stairs and just stop. I'm still hiding. Now getting really freaked out that no one opened the door and nothing happened for about 5 minutes, and then I hear the stairs creak because of where the fridge is on the wall between the garage and the stairs. The footsteps sound heavy, but walking speed up the stairs, and then down the hall back to where the creak was. And when I went into the garage in the first place, I stand there crying, my heart racing for about 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to run inside and grab the house phone. During that whole time, the creaks kept doing, still as if someone was looking for something. I keep my eyes on the clock, and we had that on the wall in the garage, and it's just now turning 2:35, meaning that no one will be home for another 4 hours. I stand in the front door and stand there and finally work up the courage to run inside and grab the house phone. The second I opened that door, steps turned heavy and ran again. But I made it back to the garage before it made it down the stairs all the way, and I called my mom immediately. I'm bawling, and the only thing I could manage to get out was steps upstairs, hiding garage. My mom's now trying to calm me down and tells me to get my dog from the backyard and stay in the garage, and she's going to call my brother to have him come over and check it out. So I grab my dog, and she immediately goes crazy, barking. Dead stares at the garage door to the house. She's never done this before. Her temperament's always been very calm and always collected, but now she was not close to her usual self. I sit, my dog, who is a black lab, stands in front of me, still barking. It felt like forever before my brother showed up. The entire time the steps kept going back and forth and back and forth. Things were hitting the ground. It sounds like a robber, the steps looking for something. But why would they stay if someone was already home and after hearing my voice knowing I'm a child? They had an opportunity to leave, but didn't. When my brother shows up, I hear his truck pull up and come to a shriek. I hear him and about 5 of his friends run into the house and run around the whole house looking for someone. My brother comes in the garage and asks if I'm okay and what happened, and I tell him. His friend comes into the garage and says there's no one here. They checked every door and window and everything was locked. Nothing was disturbed except for a few things that were on the floor in my room. If there was someone in the house, they would have seen that person as it was in a court, and they couldn't get back over the year's fence without using a ladder. I refused to go into the house, and so my brother carries me to the truck and put me in and brings my dog too, and me and a truck full of his friends head to his best friend's house. We stayed there until my mom came and picked us up. We don't talk about it. My younger brother asks, and my mom just says I got scared. I had to be carried by force back into the house, and I refused to sleep or even go into my room for a month. After that incident, I felt as if I was just being watched, but only in the house. A few other things happened in the house after that, but what happened that day was terrifying. But it doesn't compare to the feeling of being watched. By things being moved or broken or even seeing shadows in my peripheral. That was a daily occurrence, especially when I had to go to bed. I always had the covers over my head and music playing, so I didn't have to hear anything, but I would always feel something. I would feel something like a hand on my arm or my back or the breathing on my neck. I moved out of the house when I was 13 to live with my dad, and soon after my mom moved in with my stepdad into a different house. And what had happened in that house in Stockton just moved with me to my dad's, but then moved to the house my mom lives in currently, only bothering me when I visit my mom's house. If anyone wants more of my experiences that happened after this, and what happened when it followed me and what happens now that when I go to visit my mom, I'd be more than happy to share my experience. Although terrifying, I'm glad I get the experience. Hopefully somebody else can share theirs. Maybe they won't feel like they're completely crazy like I did. Thanks for reading this. It's long, but I made sure to add everything I could because it's almost like the experience happened yesterday. I will never forget it. I'll never get away from it. scary childhood experience. I'll just point out as well that 1, we did not own a dog at the time, and 2, I mentioned this to my mom not too long ago, and she said she remembers this night too, that I wasn't dreaming when I ran downstairs to her. I always thought that maybe I was making it up, but when she said she remembered it too, I kind of had to believe it then. Anyway, I can't remember how old I was, maybe 3 or 4, especially because my little sister was still a newborn baby at the time. I used to hate going to bed at night. In fact, I hated nighttime in general. I would see things around the house in shadows mostly. I think they were dogs or animals at least, and I remember them growling at me if I came too close. I specifically remember one of them under the dining room table, and I ran to my mom screaming. The fear was so strong. One night I was in bed and laying on my left side. I remember this clearly as I opened my eyes and I could see the door in the distance. After a while of laying there, I felt what I can only describe as pawns begin to walk up to the side. Sounds impossible, which I completely agree with, but that's what I felt. And then something sit on my hip bone. I opened my eyes and directly in front of me was my dog. It looked like a long-eared spaniel type dog, and as gross as it sounds, I also remember that it opened its mouth and had vomit on its tongue. Ew. I remember feeling terrified as I turned away from that, looked up at the thing sitting on my hip. It was a black dog with a thin body and sleek fur, like a greyhound's, and it had a pointed face and pointed ears that pointed upwards over its head. Its eyes stood out, but I can't remember any color. I quickly looked to my right, and there was a Jack Russell Terrier type dog there, and it started growling when I knew I could see it. I remember being frozen in fear as I looked up at the black dog and watched its head turn slowly, then suddenly snapped back to look at me. At that point, I somehow got out of bed and ran to the top of the stairs. Pretty sure there was a baby gate there at the time, so I have no idea how I got past it. But I do remember looking back into my room and seeing all 3 dogs turn to look at me before beginning to run toward me. I got down the stairs, burst into the living room where my parents and babysitter were. The dogs didn't follow as far as I knew, and I remember my mom asking me what I was doing. I was very clearly remembering saying, I wanted to see my sister. No idea why I didn't tell them what just happened, but my mom didn't say anything else or make me go back to bed. She just let me lay on the sofa with her and hold the baby. I never had another experience like after that, but I was absolutely terrified of dogs from that day until I was 9 or 10. And like I said, my mom remembers me coming into the living room and saying, talking about the dream a while later. I've often spoken about it when the paranormal comes up, but never tried to look into it until recently. Can't find anything that really matches my experience, and I can't find any history in the house. Kind of a shame. But after we moved house, I never saw any shadowed dogs again. There's something following you. I'll start off by saying that the person that told me this story was somebody that I worked with, though I cannot say in what capacity due to strict confidentiality. Suffice to say that this person was an older gentleman in his 70s and had absolutely no reason to make this up, especially not at the time of our conversation. With that said, I will tell this story from his perspective, exactly as he told it to me. I used to work for a company many years ago. The workforce consisted of mostly men, all of whom were the epitome of down-to-earth, straight-talking northerners. We had a laugh, bantered back and forth and whatnot, but we worked our asses off, and sometimes the pressure got too much. One of the men, David, he had been experiencing a headache all day that was getting worse. He managed to make it through the day until lunchtime when he suddenly went missing. I looked for him for ages, worried about what might have happened to him, until I found him sitting on the ground in an unused room, clutching his head in agony. He'd gone to find somewhere quiet, hoping it would ease the pain in his head, but it was only getting worse. No amount of painkiller took the pain away, and it was clear he was in it in a bad way. At that point, one of the others, Carl, had caught up with us. Now, the thing about Carl was that he claimed to be what he called a faith healer. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I do know that whatever he did to people, it worked. That day, I stood there and watched as Carl put his hands on Dad's head, and slowly, gradually, the pain in his face went away. I watched that man go from agony to pain-free in front of my eyes, and I honestly can't explain it. It was incredible to watch. After that, David went back to work, amazed at how good he felt, though confused at what had actually happened. As for Carl, he never spoke about it, and no one dared ask him. So we left it at that. A year or two later, I was working with Carl at another site. It was some kind of maintenance job. We were being shown around by a guy who worked for the company but traveled a lot, so it wasn't too close with most of us. I'll call him Mark so it doesn't get confusing. He was probably in his late 50s. He was a good guy, and was also aware of Carl's quote-unquote abilities, as most people in the company were. Anyway, we were all chatting away and catching up, getting the work done and discussing various things. All was normal. It wasn't until all three of us were back at Carl's house where he'd offered us a drink, and that's when Carl turned to Mark and said, "Listen, I don't want to scare you, but there's something following you. It's been standing over your shoulder all day." Now me and Mark looked at each other. In any other situation, I'd have laughed at whoever said something as daft as that. But we all knew Carl very well, and the man never spoke about stuff like that unless he had to. Mark gave a kind of worried laugh and asked, "What are you talking about?" To which Carl said, "I've seen a black figure standing behind you all day. I saw it as soon as we all met up, but I didn't want to say anything as we weren't in a safe place. It's very evil, probably demonic, so I had to find a way to tell you." Mark looked pretty scared at this point and asked if it was still there, at which point Carl shook his head and said, "No, it's outside for now. It can't cross the threshold of my house as it's protected from things like that. That's why I wanted you to come over. You need to get cleansed or it'll try to hurt you." After that, Carl gave a few things to help protect him, gave him a number to call to help him get rid of whatever was following him, but Mark was pretty shaken up. Carl had said that as soon as he left the house, it would follow him again, but it wouldn't be able to hurt him while he kept those tokens of protection with him. After we left that day, I only ever saw Mark once or twice. He never mentioned if he got cleansed or if anything else happened. But the dead seriousness in Carl's voice when he talked about the black figure will always stick in my mind. It's been a few years now since I saw this gentleman that told me this story, but it pops in my head from time to time, and I often scare myself thinking about it. I have no idea what a faith healer is, as I've never actually looked into it. I'm not at all religious either, neither was the gentleman who told me about it. So if anybody's any similar stories or personal experiences with something like this, please let me know. I don't think it's Bill after all. Only a handful of people I know about what I'm about to tell you. Everything is real, and it happened in my childhood home. grew up with my mom and my two older brothers. Our house was like any other normal house, except we were aware of a spirit, or a ghost, whatever you want to call it. And that remained in the house when he died, and his wife ended up selling it to my mom. His name was Bill. The first time I remember feeling his presence was one night when I got up to go to the bathroom and felt footsteps on the roof. They were very audible and sounded almost like drums. I actually thought that maybe there'd been more than a few people up on the roof. I woke my mom up, but she swore she didn't hear anything. Also, I clearly recall many times when doors would open or shut on their own without any wind, shampoo bottles getting knocked to the floor, picture frames falling off the walls for no reason. We'd joke and say that Bill was acting up again. Other times we would hear names being called from another room, only to find out nobody was in fact calling us. The calling sounded so real, and it was usually my mom's voice calling for me. Every time she always swore that it wasn't her. At some point, my mom got somebody to quote-unquote sweep the house. I was still young, but I remember a lady came in using something with a smoke thing, probably sage, said some words in each room, used a straw broom to sweep the spirits away. Things went quiet for a year or two. However, every member of our household seemed to always have bad luck after that. Eventually, we all began to see shadow people in the house, usually in corners. Sometimes people who would come to visit us mentioned that they could also see shadows in the corner, or they'd feel weird in our house in general, like being watched. Shortly after that started, things began to get intense in the house. Things moved right in front of us. Power would go out in the whole house. Once, as I was about to leave the house, the front door slammed shut right in front of me. I got so scared I ran to my room crying. During the days, there weren't much malevolence. Sometimes creepy, but nothing that made me feel unsafe. Once I was hiding from my mom, and this was as a joke. I used to creep in a room where she was and scare her by yelling, "Boo!" This time, as I was hiding from my mom, I was behind the bathroom door, waiting for her to walk by the hallway. This is when suddenly I heard a very clear whisper in my ear, "Boo." My heart stopped. I looked around and ran out. I always had nightmares growing up, so my mom let me sleep in her room. My nightmares started to get much worse. I'd wake up screaming in the middle of the night. My mom, scared half to death, would have to calm me down. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and couldn't get back to sleep. One of those nights I swore I could see a dark shadow of a person walking toward me. I closed my eyes, opened them again. Still coming for me. I cowered under the blankets and started crying, trying to listen carefully. After a few minutes of silence, I heard a little girl's giggle. I screamed and tried to wake my mom up. When she woke, she turned the light on and was so upset, told me I was just having nightmares. But I know I was awake. Another night I woke up in the middle of the night. I didn't want to open my eyes this time. I felt very uneasy, so I pulled the covers up. A few minutes later, I felt someone or something touching my forehead. I didn't dare scream this time. I just kept saying to myself, "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." Crazy stuff kept happening at night when I'd wake up in the middle. I hated sleeping, and many times tried to do things to get myself tired before going to bed so I wouldn't wake up before daytime. It worked sometimes, but not always. As soon as I was older, I started staying at friends' houses as much as I could. Later on, I'd stay with my boyfriend, and when I got into college, I roomed with a friend, even though the university was like 20 minutes away. I eventually moved out at 20 for good. Now, as an adult, whenever I visit home, I feel the presence as soon as I walk into the house. I try not to sleep there if I can help it. I know my mom and my brothers have their own stories to tell. We've never gotten together to tell each other of our experiences. Maybe we should. Maybe we could make a book together. A dreadful gurgle. Well, it happened to me when I was at a boarding school in Shimla. This was many years ago. I was sleeping in the senior dormitory along with some 20 other boys. My bed was positioned in the corner of a long room at some distance from the others. There was no shortage of pranksters in our dormitory, and one had to look out for introduction of stinging nettles or maybe peebles, or possibly even a small lizard under the bed sheets. But I wasn't in prepare for my body in my bed. I think they meant that they weren't prepared for a body to show up in their bed. First, I thought a sleepwalker had mistakenly gotten into my bed. I tried to push him out, muttering, "Devinder, get back into your own bed. There isn't room for two of us." Devinder was a notorious sleepwalker who had pretty much ever ended up on the roof on one occasion. But it wasn't Devinder. Devinder was a short boy, and was a fellow, and was a tall, lanky person. His feet stuck out of the blankets at the floor of the bed. It must be Ranjit, I thought. Ranjit had huge feet. "Ranjit," I hissed. "Stop playing the fool and get back into your bed." No response. I pushed him, but without success. Body was heavy and inert. It was also very cold. I lay there wondering who it could be. Then it began to dawn on me that the person beside me wasn't breathing. I have this horrible realization that there is a corpse in my bed. How did it get there, and what do I do about it? "Vishal," I called out to a boy who was sleeping a short distance away. "There's a corpse in my bed. Vishal, did you wake up?" "You're dreaming, Ray. Go to sleep and stop disturbing everyone." Just then there was a groan, followed by a dreadful gurgle from the body beside me. I shout out of the bed that something's at the top of my voice, waking up the entire dormitory, and lights came on. There was a total confusion. The housemaster came running. I told him and everyone else what happened. They came to my bed, had a good look at it. There was no one there. In my instance, I was moved to the other end of the dormitory. The house perfect. Johnson took over my former bed. 2 nights passed without further excitement, and a couple of boys started calling me Funk and Scared Cat. My response was to punch one of them in the nose. Then on the 3rd night, when we were all woken by several ear-splitting shrieks, Johnson came charging across the dormitory, screaming that 2 icy hands had just taken him by the throat and tried to squeeze the life out of him. Lights came on. The poor old housemaster came dashing in again. We called Johnson down and put him in a spare bed. The housemaster shone his torch on the boy's face and neck, and sure enough, we saw several bruises on his flesh. The outline of a large hand. Next day, the offending bed was removed from the dormitory. It was a few days before Johnson recovered from the shock. He was kept in the infirmary until the bruises disappeared. But for the rest of the year, he was a nervous wreck. Our nursing sister, who was looking after the infirmary for many years, recalls that some 20 years earlier, a boy called Tompkins had suddenly died in the dormitory. He was very tall for his age, and apparently suffered from a heart problem. That day he had taken part in football, had gone to bed looking pale and exhausted. Early next morning, when the bell rang for gym class, he was found stiff and cold, having apparently died during the night. He died peacefully, poor boy, recalled our nursing sister, but I'm not so sure. I can still remember the dreadful gurgle from the creature in my bed, and there was the struggle with Johnson. No, there was nothing peaceful about that death. Tompkins had gone most unwillingly. woken up in the middle of the night during the 2003 New York City blackout. I don't know how many of you will remember this, but in the summer of 2003, there was a widespread power outage in the northeast region of the United States and parts of Canada. I was 11 years old, and I was living with my grandma in an old suburb of Staten Island, New York. Because of this story, I'll always distinctly remember those 2 to 3 days without power. At the time, my family had just recently moved into a new house. I'd probably only been there for a few months. The house was old, probably built in the early to mid-1900s. As soon as we moved in, we immediately felt something in the house. Cold spots, random noises, shadows, voices. We realized that the house was haunted, but we never really felt that we had to leave because of it. My grandma and mom are sensitive to spirits, and we'd lived in other haunted houses before, so we were kind of used to it. Our ancestral house in the Philippines was much worse, so we really weren't in a rush to move so quickly after just moving in. In this house, I only ever saw shadows and heard voices, while my grandma and mom saw full-body apparitions. That is, until the blackout happened. So one night during the blackouts, it was hot as hell. The temperature was probably in the high 80s or low 90s with no air conditioning due to the power. So I asked my grandmother if I could sleep in her room. That was since it was on the 3rd floor, the coolest part of the house. She obliged, and I fell asleep next to my grandmother after playing Pokemon on my Game Boy under the covers for a few hours. I was woken up by a strange noise in the middle of the night a few hours later, probably around 1 or 2 a.m. It was freezing cold, so cold that I forgot about the power outage and thought that the AC was on. The noise sounded like a distant wailing, kind of like really high-pitched police sirens. It was loud enough to wake me, but somehow still sounded really far away. At this point, I'm not really thinking much of it since the window's open, and I assumed the noise was coming from outside. I'm still under the covers and wide awake, so I grab my Game Boy and start playing Pokemon in silence. That way I won't wake my grandmother. I was obsessed with the game. As I'm playing, I notice the noise getting louder and closer. This continued for another minute or so until I start to get really annoyed. Just as I was about to pull the covers off to investigate, I feel a weight shift on the bed and hear the mattress spring squeak by the foot of the bed. I look over to check if my grandma was still there, or if she somehow left without me knowing. She didn't. She was still there. I slowly peek out from under the covers and see a pale-skinned woman with long dark hair sitting by the foot of the bed. She was wearing a light-colored dress, face toward the wall. Her hands were pressed against her face and eyes, and she was crying, which I now realize is the noise that I'd been hearing. I was terrified and shaking, so I turned to wake my grandmother, but I realized she's already sitting up and she's praying the rosary in silence. She then turned to me and said, "Don't worry, she won't hurt you. She visits me every night." I'll never forget it. I was freaked out and just shut my eyes until I fell back asleep. Anyways, after that night, I never slept in my grandmother's room again. I continued to feel a presence in the house, but I never heard the wailing or saw the woman again. My grandmother, on the other hand, said that the woman continued her nightly visits until we moved a year later. My story about my grandmother's house. Let me start off by saying that these stories are 100% real. Also, let me say that I do not believe in ghosts per se, but these stories are things I think about often. They give me the willies every time I think or talk about them. Buckle up. Due to the backstory being needed, this is going to be a long one. I grew up in southern Louisiana, And as a kid, I loved going to my grandparents' house to do things such as fish, watch movies with my grandfather, and cook with my grandmother. This house is a beautiful home, still standing, surrounded by stately oaks and broad magnolias. Baton Rouge folks will get the reference. It has a long winding driveway where moss hangs from 100-year-old oak trees. This is over the gravel drive, and a beautiful pond off to the right side of the drive. It's an absolutely beautiful home on an absolutely gorgeous piece of land. The woman who built the house owned a small shop in the suburb of South Louisiana. This woman was very beautiful, and from what I've been told, never missed an opportunity to dress up in her high heels. She was married to a man who'd been in a car accident, I think. He was severely handicapped. As his condition got worse, she had to sell the house and downsize in order to pay for his medical bills. When my grandparents bought the house from her, she was extremely devastated that she had to let it go. She was legitimately obsessed with this house. It was like a child to her. She was so obsessed with this house, in fact, that there were several times that my grandparents went out to run errands and came back to her there, peering into the windows of the house to quote-unquote check on it. Fast forward some years after she moved out of the house. My grandparents were settled. She was killed by a notorious Louisiana serial killer that tormented South Louisiana from 92 to 2003. She was one of the 7+ victims in his terrible killing spree. Fast forward again years after her murder. I started spending many weeks at this house loving life, being a normal kid. I had no idea about the previous owner, but always felt very uneasy when I was in this house by myself. Hearing random knocks and footsteps was normal, and my grandparents always just attributed to the house shifting. My grandmother's 2 Siamese cats, Wally and Ernie, were always around and sort of comforted me when I was alone in the house. I always thought that they could also be attributed to the random noises. When my brother and I would go over there to the house as young kids, we would sleep in the bed in the master bedroom with my grandmother and her 2 cats. We would be constantly woken up by weird noises and what sounded like somebody walking on the wood floor in the hallway connected to the closet. What's extremely creepy about this is that in front of the closet there were high heel marks, permanently marked into the old creaky wood floor where the previous homeowner would get dressed and put on her high heels. One night I clearly remember knocking. It was loud enough to wake me up, and one of her cats getting extremely agitated to the point where it stood up on all fours looking in the direction of the noise with its hair standing up on its neck. The feeling that someone was in the room was extremely startling and spine-chilling. This started to happen more times than not, especially when we went over there. At this point, I started to ask my grandparents questions due to the fact that I was scared shitless every night I went there. They acted like they had no idea what I was talking about. I'm sure that was to make me not scared. One day I was in the office and computer room at the front of the house by myself while everybody else was outside fishing. I was genuinely enjoying myself, drawing a picture of a pelican that I had pulled over my computer. Sitting next to me was a stack of DVD cases, stacked about 4 or 5 feet high on a desk. When I looked down to resume my pelican drawing, the stack of cases were forcefully pushed off the desk and landed about 2 to 3 feet away on the floor. I simply couldn't believe my eyes. I got up and ran outside as fast as I could. When I told the story to my grandparents, they were very skeptical, just kind of laughed it off. At this point, I was genuinely convinced that something was wrong with this house. One night, not long after the event, while watching a movie with my grandfather, something happened to me that I will never forget. My grandfather had just fallen asleep and was laid back in his recliner, delivering his trademark loud snores. Being that the house was away from any light source and that it was miles from town, it was extremely dark and quiet when the lights were off. I continued to watch the movie by myself and got the intense feeling like someone was watching me. I tried to brush it off, but it was so intense that it felt like someone was standing next to me just watching me watch the movie. The room started to feel like it was getting smaller and smaller around me. It genuinely felt like I was intruding on someone else's space. Eventually, in the hallway behind us, I heard footsteps as if someone was walking away in high heels. It was the strangest thing that's ever happened to me. To this day, I have no idea what happened, and it will forever perplex me. Not long after that, my grandfather told us the story of the previous homeowner and her love and obsession with the house. Both of my grandparents are chemists, and the people of science, just like me, they didn't believe in ghosts. I don't know what it was in that house, but we eventually stopped going over there because it scared us beyond belief. In the summer of 2016, the house along with most of Baton Rouge area flooded. It got 8 feet of water throughout the whole house and destroyed every wall and even some of the ceiling. At that time, my family's house flooded as well, so I was living with a friend. One night, my grandmother asked if I could just go let the builders into her house. That way they could continue the work on the house. I agreed, picked up the key from her, got to the house early, just so I could experience that energy one last time before they sold it and got rid of it. I walked up to the front door, unlocked it, and walked in. To my very pleasant surprise, I didn't feel anything. The house was empty, all of the walls were knocked down, and I could see through the whole building from the kitchen. All the creaky wood floors with the high heel marks were torn out. All of the belongings were gone, and it was barren. It smelled like a powerful mixture of mud and paint. I genuinely think that this flood took whatever energy that was in that house out with it when it drained. It's so weird because I have such an attachment to that house. I want to own it one day, even though it scared the ever-living fuck out of me in my youth. Four different experiences in one night. So when I'm in high school, I was staying at a friend's house one night. They had 2 spare bedrooms because his sister had moved out to go stay with their mom. The other was at his grandmother's. Late one night, we were in the kitchen looking for something to snack on. We started to hear the squeak of the rocking chair coming from the grandmother's room. Experience 1. We decided to just let go and go to his room for some gaming. We were going to take our mind off of it. About an hour later, we decided to head to bed. Well, he did at least. I went to the second spare room, the sister's old room, and was just lying in bed playing on the phone. A few minutes after laying down, I could hear heavy footsteps in the hallway, as if someone was wearing boots. It had a hardwood floor, so it was pretty loud. The steps would go from the kitchen to the bedroom and back, and this continued for about 10 minutes. Experience 2. Well, finally the steps stop. Quick side note, whenever a car would pass by, the headlights would shine directly into the room. Anyways, every time a car passed by and the light came through, there was a shadow of a large man in the corner, probably about 6 or 7 feet tall. Experience 3. Well, all of a sudden it gets like dead quiet, like absolute silence. No snoring, they spelled that wrong. No snoring from his dad, no cars outside, no barking dogs next door, no geckos. Then without any warning, the closet door slammed open. It fell off of its hinges. Experience 4. I said, "Fuck this. I know and I'm not wanted." I quickly gathered my things and left. Never stayed at his house again. When I told him about all of this the next day, he was just like, "Oh shit, yeah, that's Dan, he's a dick." The scariest thing to happen to me as a teenager. When I was a teenager, I had experiences. This is one of them. I don't know what this is, but to be honest, I'd love to know if somebody could help me figure it out. Now first let me explain the house so you can better understand the layout. When you walked in the front door, to your left was the living room, to the right was a closet, and behind that was my room. That was a den that used to be a bedroom due to the unforeseen circumstance. Making from the front door 20 feet to the kitchen, and from my bedroom 10 feet to the kitchen, the stairs to upstairs were to the right between my room and the kitchen. One night I was in my room on my bed. I was with my cat, Sammy. I was watching TV as I heard footsteps. I felt confused because everybody else was upstairs asleep. My cat got to the edge of the bed and stared at the door as the footsteps that I now recognized as high heels moved from my bedroom to the kitchen and then back. It was always stopping at my doorway. It would stand there for a moment, then pace yet again. A feeling of fear hit me. My cat never stopped looking at the door as these steps kept it for pacing about an hour. The next night I had pushed them out of my mind, till late at night again I heard the footsteps. This time there was 2 sets, dress shoes and high heels. Again, my first thought was my parents, but they were upstairs asleep, and so was everyone else. My cat looked at this door and I pet her as I did the same. A feeling of fear hitting me again, this thought of, if you go out of your room, it will not end well. About an hour till they stopped and asked my parents if they had been up or heard anything that last 2 nights. I just got a confused look and a no. Side notes. I've seen ghosts before in this house. They've scared me, but not made me, feel fear. Never the feeling of it when I left my room, of me being unsafe. Due to the ghost that I've seen, I had put a protective barrier around my room so ghosts couldn't enter. It was not something I did on purpose, just with the deep desire to be safe in my room. I also found out that the house had no threshold, and was the only one in the house that could see or feel anything. Fighting with a ghost with a rake. The incident that scared me the most took place when I was about 14. For some background, I live in a 3-story Victorian house. The incident occurred when a friend, and I'm going to call her Sarah, we went home alone, getting ready to go meet each other, and our friend, of course. It was after school, so I had to change out of my uniform. I left Sarah drinking a can of Dr. Pepper in the kitchen on the ground floor, while I went to change into my bedroom on the 2nd floor. I had nearly finished when I heard this almighty crash from the kitchen. So I ran downstairs to find Dr. Pepper all over the floor and the wall. I asked Sarah what happened, and she insisted that something had knocked it out of her hand, although I didn't really believe her at first. I helped her clean it up, and she gathered all the sodden paper towels up. But walking to the side of the room where the kitchen bin was, just as she raised the Dr. Pepper can back to her lips, get the last dregs out, the can flew out of her hand with such force it hit the wall to her right. I know it could be said that she threw it, but I saw the whole thing, and the way her hand snapped back. There's no way that she could have gotten such power from a flick of the wrist like that. It genuinely looked like someone had walked right up to her and smacked it out of her hand as hard as they could. It even cut her lip, and at that point, we were both utterly terrified, which only worsened when we heard heavy footsteps moving above us from the top floor. We ran as fast as we could for the front door, not stopping until we reached the relatively safe garden. Unfortunately, we then realized that we couldn't even leave if we wanted to. I'd left my keys inside, and Sarah had left her purse. We decided we absolutely had to go back in, but not without protection. S grabbed the garden rake, holding it across her body while I stayed close to her back. We grabbed our things, straining to hear more movement, and finally we heard it again, just as we were leaving for the second time. It sounded a lot closer now and faster, like they were moving toward us. We ran for the door, and this time with my firmly locking it behind us, hoping to keep whatever it was trapped inside, of course. After that, we refused to return to the house that evening until my dad came home. Still freaks me out to this day. I've had loads of other experiences, like touches and more footsteps and sounds of heavy doors slamming, glasses inexplicably breaking, even sightings of apparitions, which I'll share at a later date if you guys want. I'm also planning to do research into the history of the house, so hopefully I can find a possible explanation for this haunting. My home might be haunted. I often hear what sounds like people, and they're walking above my bed. The only issue is that I'm on the top floor apartment and have 2 floors to myself. I will also hear what sounds like people walking above me when downstairs. I have 3 cats and 1 dog. I always check to see where they are. My dog is always with me. I don't see the cats making this kind of noise. I was outside once with my dog, and oddly, after watching a lot of spooky videos on YouTube, I saw a shadow person poke its arm out of the bush. Unless my neighbors are always dropping things and the walls are incredibly thin, I think my home is haunted. There's too many noises, too many weird cold and hot spots. I don't know if this is the right place to post this. How do I tell if there are spirits here? How do I go about engaging with them peacefully and learning? I once bought the Satanic Bible to read for information and wanted to see what was so appealing to the black metal bands that I read about. It sat in the same place every night when I would go to sleep. My pup never messed with it until I got to the chapter on how to sell your soul. I woke up to a shredded book. Good dog. So I'm hesitant to mess with these kinds of forces without guidance. There's so much to read online, I was hoping somebody could point me in the right direction. The Boy in the Closet. When I was 10, my family moved into a house that was the original train station for the town in the late 1800s. We had been there for about a week. Everything seemed normal for the most part. My parents didn't have a key for any of the interior doors because they required a skeleton key. I should point out that the layout of the house was strange because the only way to get into my parents' room was to go through my room. Anyway, one morning at breakfast, my dad was late waking up, but when he came to the table he started asking me who my friend was that stayed the night. I tried telling him that I didn't know anybody, but he was adamant that somebody slept over. I took my mom, and while I was trying to convince him that no one was in the house that night, my dad, who wasn't one to be scared of anything, turned pale and was completely uncomfortable. He told us that he saw a boy about my age walk out of his closet, so we got out of bed and followed him into my room, where the boy went into my closet and shut the door behind him. My dad said he knocked on the door lightly, told the boy to stay out of his bedroom, and then went back to bed. The problem with that story is that, well, we just moved into that house. My parents had boxes stacked in front of their closet. The biggest issue, though, is that both closets couldn't have been opened in the first place because our landlord hadn't gotten us a skeleton key yet. To this day, he doesn't like to talk about that night, and it still freaks him out. Years later, I did some research at the local library. Found like a little bit of newspaper that talked about a 9-year-old that died on the railroad tracks outside of the house. That was when it was still the railroad station. Thanks for still tuning in to Paranormal M. See ya. And the dogs, the cows, the geckos, and the birds appreciate you watching.